All right. I guess I can start talking about RFK Jr. dropping out and endorsing Trump. Uh, for those of you not familiar, RFK Jr. was running in the Democratic primary as a Democrat, but then after a while switched to running as an independent. From the get-go, RFK Jr. was a pretty obvious plant by the Republicans in the Democratic Party to draw votes away from Joe Biden. And the reason that it was so obvious is because it was so poorly executed. RFK Jr., his entire political identity revolves around conspiracies regarding, I don't know, the media, the Jews, and especially COVID. He cannot shut up about COVID conspiracy theories. I've talked about his candidacy before, and that it was actually kind of beneficial for him to stay in the race because he drew a right-wing conspiracy crank kind of crowd that would have otherwise been potentially voting for Trump. And now he's dropped out and endorsed Donald Trump to try to, well, help Donald Trump win. But here's the thing. Kamala Harris is now the nominee for the Democratic Party, even with a joint RFK Trump sort of coalition of support, voter base. It's not going to be enough, I think, to catch up to the Democratic Party this campaigning cycle. And his concession speech, the speech that he made where he dropped out, was also like absolutely off the rails. RFK Jr. Basically spent like an hour talking about COVID conspiracies and like the media unfairly representing him and whatever else, right? And then spent maybe a couple minutes saying, "Oh, and President Trump shares my values, so I'm endorsing him for president or whatever." Like, pretty wild. And in fact, it actually, I think he went so crazy with it in the press conference that it actually kind of sabotaged whatever base of support he could have drawn, even in part, for Donald Trump this cycle, right? Like, um, there was a lot of talking points, very incongruous and all over the place talking points about COVID conspiracies, about the media, about Russia and Ukraine and whatever, to such an extent that it was really kind of like, who is this for? I'm hard pressed to think of a demographic that would really be taken in by any of this rhetoric who wasn't already supporting Trump, right? Like for the prospective fence sitters and whatever, talking about COVID conspiracies and praising Vladimir Putin sounds absolutely insane. Even a lot of conservatives in America, ideologically similar to Putin though they may be, do not like Vladimir Putin, you know? So it was kind of like the funniest timeline was realized, where RFK Jr. is an obvious Republican plant, and then he drops out to support Trump, but it doesn't end up mattering. It was all altogether just an absolutely wild occasion, you know? And you know what it did? It didn't help with the it fed further into the Republicans are huge fucking weirdos narrative, because now RFK Jr. is going to have his campaign associated with Donald Trump more than he had been in the past. And yeah, he's a fucking weirdo. A lot of his campaign, are composed of weirdos. And like, that's not doing them any favors. And it is very funny. So, all the power to RFK Jr. for even in the consolidation phase where he tries to fold into the Republican Party and coalesce with them to build support, for still somehow sabotaging the Republican base of support by, like, being so crazy that you turn off anybody. Oh, shit, I'm really lagging. Who potentially would have been on the fence. I wonder how much is there really for me to say about RFK that hasn't already been said. You know, the man's a lunatic. And, you know, a lunatic running for president with a lunatic political platform is going to draw lunatics. What is he crazy about? COVID conspiracies, you know, something, deep state media censorship. And he's also a eugenicist. That's notable. He talked about fucking chronic disease, which also links to COVID. But, you know, just as a cherry on top, he referred to chronic diseases as something that includes autism, ADHD, whatever, and invoked the pretty not frequent, pretty otherwise infrequent, like, far-right talking point that, instances of depression, ADHD, and, Tourette syndrome are much higher now than 70 years ago. I wonder why. You know, the underlying position there, or the implied position being anybody who has any sort of condition or disorder or whatever, should be put in a straitjacket, or should be, wrapped on the hands with a ruler, sort of a abusive 1950s style. You know? Again, nothing he really said in that speech, I feel, is doing him any favors with people who would have been, like, undecided, or like, that he would be looking to sap to support Trump instead of Kamala Harris at this point. You know, again, I think that was a massive failure on the part of the Republicans, because the Republicans are so insane that they have completely lost the plot and no longer know what being not insane by comparison looks like, you know? Oh yeah, outside of the campaign trail, RFK Jr. has also done so much insane stuff that he's probably a massive liability even to the Trump campaign, which is hard to achieve, but, you know, my man finds a way. You know, like him having put that bear cub in Central Park, like the fucking dead bear cub that he dumped in Central Park, like more than 10 years ago. That was the thing RFK Jr. Did. But I guess I'll harp on some of the. I'll just one more time harp on some of the things I said in my last segment about RFK Jr. The one where I covered TYT sort of grifting to the right by endorsing RFK Jr., which is that, you know, RFK Jr. was a pretty transparent grifter from the get-go, trying to just use his name recognition to coast by in the campaign trail and ultimately draw support away from a Democratic voter base to help Donald Trump. You know, I was able to tell, as well as many others even at the time, that he was a plant from the Republican Party, but irrespective of whether or not that was the case, the plan for him to draw support from the Democrats and give support to Trump clearly was not working, because he was such a open conspiracy crank that he only drew from a conspiracy crank audience, which leans very right-wing. You know, maybe you'd get some Libertarian Party people in there, but mostly, you know, they'd be Republicans, you know? So the sort of spoiler effect, which is a very real thing in two-party systems, where candidates from minor factions or minor parties draw support away from more major candidates, it worked in the opposite direction that they wanted it to. What they wanted was for RFK Jr. to be a somewhat comparable candidate, ideologically speaking, to Joe Biden, so that they could draw support from the Biden coalition. But instead, he ended up being ideologically similar enough to Donald Trump that he's instead drawing disproportionately from a right-wing base of support, making the spoiler effect work in our favor. I know a lot of people, you know, throw shade at the concept of the spoiler effect, but I feel like that comes from a place of bias, of it mostly being used against the left. In this case, this works to our favor. or worked past tense, and potentially still is, because RFK Jr., a sort of nagging small external part of the right-wing campaign and propaganda machine, is so insane that he couldn't even give a normal "I'm suspending my campaign" type of speech. He had to go into a crazed conspiracy rant about COVID-19, Russia, eugenics, and all different manner of things. And then only very briefly mention, yeah, also I'm supporting Trump. Like, this doesn't appeal to anybody outside of the existing base of support. And in fact, for anybody undecided, that rhetoric is likely to turn people off. Some people might have more conspiratorial sensibilities than others, but you mentioned anti-vax politics. You mentioned Putin in a positive light, which RFK Jr. did a few times. And like, you've instantly lost the average American. Like, people are stupid, but they're not so stupid that they don't understand what a fucking vaccine does, right? Like, people aren't so stupid that they don't get, like, yeah, vaccines inoculate you against a disease, and that's why diseases don't spread like fucking wildfire in developed countries. And, you know, also the majority of Americans will be able to recognize very easily, like, yeah, you know, Putin, pretty bad guy, you know, not gonna lie. So, you know, shoutouts to the spoiler effect, linking these two right-wing candidates together in a way that's actually pretty beneficial to the Democratic ticket. I will get to there are some segments that I want to do after this one where I have some critiques to make of the Democratic Party. You know, which obviously they deserve plenty of critique as well, because they're only the left most viable option. They're not like a leftist party or anything like that. But like, this can only be good for us. Like, RFK Jr. dropping out in the way that he did, you know, extremely funny. And I think I'll end it there.